All right, thank you all for coming on this dreary day. I want to start off by thanking some people. I want to thank Arthur Patton Hawk and Larissa Kennedy from the Charles Warren Center, and Gerald Trotman and Marcy Morgan from the Hiphop Archive. This has been it's been a complicated event to put together because it's very, very timely, and unless Tough Poe has remembered to turn off his phone, then you will discover that he's been a very, very busy person over the last couple of weeks. So we're really, really happy to have him here. I think, however, that we should start with a moment of silence for Michael Brown, for Eric Garner, for the literally countless, because uncounted, victims of police violence in the United States over the long history of the United States. So let's just start with that. We have a lot to reflect on. To help us reflect, we have Brandon Terry, who's a prize fellow in economics, history, and politics, assistant professor of social studies and African American studies as of next year?
That's right.
Yeah. Originally from Baltimore, a Harvard undergraduate, Oxford master's degree, Yale PhD. He's writing a book on the tragic vision of the civil rights movement. And for those of you who don't know Brandon, you are in for a treat this afternoon. I'm Walter Johnson. I'm in the history department and in African and African American studies. I've started off to write a book about St. Louis, and so that's partly how I've put myself up here. And as part of that, well, I guess really before that, I started looking at some of the operations of the city government in Ferguson and looking at the videos of the city council meeting, and that's where I actually, it's not from my deep knowledge of hip hop, but it's from, I discovered Tough Poe in a video of the Ferguson city council meeting and was inspired by what he had to say there, and have taken some of my cues from how to think about this moment in our common history from his writing, particularly in the Riverfront Times. So as soon as you all go home, you should check out Tough Poe's different pieces dating back, you know, year and a half, 2 years, maybe even longer in the Riverfront Times, some of which I think, I guess, seem unfortunately prescient in light of the recent past. I mean, really a map to the history of St. Louis and different things happening in St. Louis, as well as some cutting-edge hip-hop criticism. Mm-hmm. Tough Poe was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. His real name is Teflon Poetics, but he also goes by Kareem Jackson. He's a rapper and an agent for social change. Through his unwavering integrity, sincere rhymes, and passionate actions, Tough Poe is changing musical and social political landscape. Tough built his reputation as a battle rapper in St. Louis and has continued to grow and expand his vision to a broader spectrum. He's always had a penchant for politics and social justice, and the subject matter finds itself laced throughout his music. However, Tough does not consider himself a conscious rapper. Humans are complex and multidimensional. His music is a reflection of that same human experience. This holistic approach has resulted in a healthy catalog of well-received projects. Tough has had the pleasure of working with the likes of Lupe Fiasco, Talib Kweli, Common, I-20, Killer Mike, Royce da 5'9", and Big Boy. As an independent artist, Tough has successfully broken through on internet, radio, and television. Tough Poe has been mentioned in major media outlets such as MSNBC, BET, Noisy, The Source, XXL, Washington Post, New York Times, Smoking Section, hiphopdx.com. He's also The Source's unsigned hype for 2012, retired champion from BET's 106 Park Freestyle Friday competition, and this is the best one right here. Has his own day, August 6th, presently in the city of Pine Lawn, Missouri. So you were born in Pine Lawn?
Yeah.
Pine Lawn is just, for those of you who don't know, St. Louis is what, a mile and a half south of Ferguson.
It's in St. Louis, small town in St. Louis.
Tef Poe continues to forge his own path as an independent artist, traveling, performing, writing for the Riverfront Times, and actively organizing for fighting for human rights with groups such as Amnesty and National Hands Up United, of which Tef Poe is a co-founder, Organization for Black Struggle and Justice for Reggie. Tef has recorded and released a title track entitled Change the World, and that's exactly what he has set out to do. More recently, I think, is War Cry, which is a track that's about Ferguson and state and local politics in Missouri that I, again, urge you all to listen to as soon as you get home. What we thought we'd do is just start off with a couple of questions, a little conversation that we just try to generate. You all are free to jump in anytime with questions, okay? So Brandon and I have both prepared questions, and we've talked a little bit, but really this is not meant to be a kind of a front to back conversation, in spite of how we've set up the room. So, you know, that if there are things that you want to jump in with, ideas you have, or things you know about, just jump right in, okay? But I thought what we do is just start off asking you to tell us a little bit about the things that you've been doing and involved with, both since the murder of Michael Brown and then since November the 22nd, and to, I guess, so much of the way that black politics and black people get represented in the mainstream media focuses on disorganization and uncontrolled behavior. I guess what I'd also, you know, just am interested in is to hear you talk about all the forms of organizational politics that you've been involved in.
Well, how y'all doing, first of all? Almost lost my fingers last night in New York, so if I look like I'm going through some antagonizing pain, just bear with me. But basically, okay, August 9th, it was a regular day for me. I didn't have a preconceived notion of waking up and jumping out into the streets of St. Louis and doing anything radical. I didn't wake up that day and expect to be on the brink of a new civil rights moment in our country. I didn't think that, it was just a regular day for me. I very much believe in a term, well, I believed in a term prior to Ferguson. I used to believe in a term called casual revolution, where you can be a regular person, live your regular life, and just play a role in changing the world casually, which is what most Americans choose to do. As long as I know homophobia is wrong, I myself do not discriminate against gay people, so I am being progressive. As long as I know that sexism is wrong, I myself am not, the thought of knowing it is wrong is good enough. I acknowledge it. I'm cool. So I was one of them people before Ferguson. When Mike Brown was murdered, I was at home living a regular life. I was about to promote a party. I throw parties in St. Louis. I do a monthly event, monthly hip-hop event. And I just woke up that day to promote that event. And I got on Instagram, Facebook. I was about to throw the flyers up and probably go do something like buy myself a pair of kicks for the night or something. But as I was putting the flyers up, I noticed a picture of Mike Brown's stepdad. At the time, I thought it was his real dad because he was holding a sign that read, "My unarmed child has just been murdered by Ferguson PD." And the look in his face was so intense, and just the aura of that picture. Just if you have any type of humanity in you and you were from St. Louis, Missouri, from that community, from that neighborhood, had any access to that neighborhood, if you saw that picture and you didn't move or it didn't move you, then maybe there was something wrong with you internally. So I saw the picture, and I actually lived with my manager. he's my roommate. So I walked into his room, and I said, man, did you hear about that kid that just got shot in Ferguson? And he was in his bed sleep. And I said, he has a couch in his room, so I sat on the couch, and I kept on typing on Facebook. And, you know, and I kind of asked him to gauge what my reaction was going to be, I think I went to talk to him, and I was like, if he felt appalled by that, then maybe it would move me to get up and do something too. But he kind of just slept through it. And we kind of both had the same attitude at that point. Like, yeah, man, it sucks, but police kill kids in St. Louis all the time. Like, maybe they'll do some marches, they'll get in the streets for 2 or 3 days, and then they'll sweep it under the rugs. Nothing will happen, you know? So that's what ordeal I really believe Mike Brown was going to be at first. Just a shooting, kind of like one of those urban legend police shootings. So something different started to happen with this one. Ferguson PD left Mike Brown in the street for 4.5 hours. No ambulance came to the scene. Initially, they tried to throw his body into the back of a black SUV. And the people in that neighborhood turned up and basically said, if you put his body in the back of that truck, we're going to burn this place down tonight. So they left him there, and I believe they left him in the middle of the street because the entire Mike Brown situation is a cover-up. Everything from top to bottom, in my opinion, is a cover-up on behalf of the Ferguson PD. I've lived in St. Louis all my life. I've organized in St. Louis prior to Mike Brown. We were doing some things centered around education reform, so we were knocking doors in Ferguson. I grew up in North County in a small area called Delwood, which is right outside of Ferguson. And the most annoying thing about St. Louis is they have, I believe, 97 different municipalities. So that's 97 different opportunities to run into a different type of police precinct. So you have a Ferguson PD, and then you have a Jennings PD, which is right next to Ferguson. Then you have a Delwood PD, which is right next to Ferguson. So for people that are out of town, they're driving through, all of this stuff is along the same strip. So you drive through, and you don't realize it, but you're driving through different towns. So with different police precincts come different types of policing, come different laws, come different mayors, come different police chiefs. I mean, it's just an ongoing opportunity to just get locked up for nothing. So I grew up in Delwood, so I'm very familiar with Ferguson. And I knew off the rip, everybody that's in my age bracket, 27 years old, everybody in my age bracket knew that it was immediate BS, immediate. We knew off the rip that some racist cop shot Mike Brown and that it was a cover-up act. We grew up not being able to drive through North County at night. If my friends live in North County and we're gonna go out for the night, I'll call them like, yo, what you doing? Blah, 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 we doing this, we doing that. Can you come pick me up? Where you at? I'm off Chambers in West Florissant. Nope, not coming to pick you up. You're gonna have to figure it out tonight. So that's the culture we grew up in St. Louis. My father and his father, they kind of were more embracing of that culture than my generation. So, like, we pushed back on that, but how much could we really push back because that's the police? So when this happened, I think that we all were on the same collective conscience. Something clicked inside of every young person at the same exact time. So I eventually got up, went to Ferguson. My brother called me, my younger brother. He's like the ghetto reporter. He knows everything that's going on in the hood. He meets you one time, know all your business. So he called me, man. When he called me, I knew it was real. So he called me, and he was like, yo, they just killed this dude, man. And I was like, what's going on? And he was like, Mike Brown. I was like, you knew Mike Brown? He's like, no, I didn't know him, but my homeboy did. And I was like, all right, yeah, sure, I know. And then he was explaining to me that he was like basically executed because I hadn't had the details at that point. And mind you, 4.5 hours is a long time. So on Facebook, this is building up. People are just taking pictures and statuses are popping up like crazy. So it was a really big deal for us locally on Facebook before it went national. And I think that's what led a lot of people into the streets, you know? So when I got out there, it looked like a scene from Die Hard. And this is before CNN shows up. This is before MSNBC shows up. This is before all the the sexy aspects of the situation got applied to it. So we're driving in. We can't even enter North County in a normal fashion. I live in St. Louis City, actually, but the portion of the city that I live on, you can get to the county like in 5 minutes. So we tried to drive into the area, and the cops had it blocked off. First thing I noticed is that all jurisdictions were in Ferguson, and that's just not normal. Like, you would only do something like that if Osama bin Laden showed up. Like, there was no reason to have every jurisdiction there. So we were driving through, and we look at the side streets. There's cops putting riot gear on. They got big guns. There's dogs out. It felt like the 60s, you know. It was just an immediate, aggressive policing. Like, you're hearing it right from the horse's mouth. Like, and that's what I try to tell people, like, about the story all the time, because they try to paint the narrative of the community being violent. I didn't go out there with a gun. I went out there to see why a dead body was in the street for 4.5 hours. I went to the Quick Trip. There was a bunch of cars parked at the Quick Trip. For some reason, everybody kept talking about the Quick Trip, but there was nothing going on at the Quick Trip. So I left there. I went to Canfield Green, which the apartment area that Mike Brown died in, if you're black, from anywhere from 18 to like 35, you spent some time in that apartment complex, or you know a person that lives in that complex. So it felt like a personal attack. So when I got out there, of course, I see my cousin. My cousin's like, yo, I just moved from Canfield. And I was like, word? He was like, yeah. So he got to telling me what happened. He literally just went through the motions of what happened with the Mike Brown and Darren Wilson altercation. A lot of people saw that shooting. That's important to note. A lot of people saw that shooting. A lot of people are not going to come out and speak about it because the response of the police is flat out, we will kill you if we have to. So I crossed the street, talked to a friend of mine. I see a ginormous puddle of blood on the cracks of the street, on the side of the streets. And I looked down because I almost stepped in it. And I paused and I said, damn, this is Mike's blood, man. Like, I'm literally seeing his blood right in front of me. And that moment moved me a lot. And I crossed the street, went back over to the other side where he had died. Some of his family members were out there. Everybody was just in a state of shock. You know, the police say that they bulked up on the force because people were shooting at them, but I was out there, man. Nobody was shooting at the cops. Like, people were shocked that it was a dead body. And I left because I said, man, this situation is going to get bad, so I left. As we leave, I see like 50 cop cars rushing down West Florissant, turning into the strip where Mike Brown was murdered. Coming from this direction, I see about 20 cop cars coming from this direction. And they kind of just all flooded into the area at once. And I turned back around with my friends. We go back, and I put up the first Vine that I put up from the incident right then and there when that happened, because I had never witnessed anything like that. Cops got out, double-barrel shotguns. There's people lined up on the side of the street. It's a very narrow road. They ran over the spot where his mother had placed rose petals. A German Shepherd peed on those rose petals. And at that point, that's when everybody in the community got very explosive. Nobody threw any bricks, nobody flipped over any cars, nobody burnt any buildings, but the police get out with double-barrel shotguns against an unarmed community. They're aiming them at people, they're sicking dogs on people. People are like, you know, on the curb trying to keep German Shepherds from biting them. There's children out there. A local drug dealer named Buddy pulled up, blocked the cops in, sat on his car, and said, if you're not from the community, you need to leave right now. The cops did not like that. They felt there was a notion of disrespect, so they slammed the doors. They kind of like made a point to run over the spot where he was murdered, and they skirted out. And from that point, I was excited because I had never witnessed a community remove a police force. So I was like, whoa, that's kind of dope. But at the same time, I was like, they're coming back. And when they come back, it's going to be hell. And that's pretty much, for me, like exactly how Ferguson started. It didn't start from young dudes going out busting windows. It didn't start from crazy people standing on top of cars, yelling profane things at the cops. It started when Mike Brown was murdered, left in the street for 4.5 hours for all of his peers to see. He didn't even live in Canfield Green. That's the thing that people, like, there's so many misconceptions about the story. He's not from Ferguson. He's actually from Pine Lawn. He was visiting his grandmother. His grandmother does not live in Canfield Green. He didn't die in the apartment complex that he lived in. She lives in a complex called Northwinds, which is about maybe 3 minutes away from where he died at. So he was literally he was on his way home and murdered. And it just sucks, man.
You know, when the decision came down, the grand jury decision, you know, you were right out there on the street, and the rest of us were watching from home. Right, a lot of people around the country, around the world, watching from home, and the way we saw it come down was a split screen, right? And on one side of the screen was President Obama urging calm and reconciliation, trying to play both sides of the issue. And on the other side, we saw Ferguson erupt.
Right.
And, you know, as I watched that image, it was sort of it was a searing image, right? Like I felt like this is an image that history is going to hand down, because what better captures black politics at this moment than this juxtaposition, these two images side by side? What happens when you put all your faith in this kind of electoral politics,
right,
and what happens when people lose faith that the system is going to respond to even the most basic human needs in any way? And one of the things that's been giving me hope in all of this is that you guys seem to be providing an education for the whole country, again, for the whole world, that there's a different way, right? That there's a way out that involves real organization, real civil society. And one of the things I really like you to talk about is that, again, like, you know, you talked a lot about media misrepresentation. I think people forget just how long it was between August and when the verdict came down just a few weeks ago. And you guys, my understanding is that you guys had people out there every single day, and you guys didn't miss a day. And part of the reason I would venture, you know, what I know about civil rights movement activism and police responses, that part of the reason people, they decided to take so long was to try to wait you guys out.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, to try to wear you down.
Definitely.
How did you avoid that? How did you continue to generate excitement, enthusiasm, sacrifice, and turn people out every single day?
So I came up with this thought last night in New York. We did a town hall, and I've been fighting for a way to describe like what we're actually doing on the ground in Ferguson, you know? And I think it's important to note that, okay, so Ferguson, Missouri is no longer, in the city of St. Louis as a whole, to be honest with you, it's not just in Ferguson. It's no longer it's not a peaceful protest front. It is a militant, nonviolent resistance front that looks totally different than peaceful protests. And I think the narrative is unfair that you get to come gun us down, shoot us down, and say, you got to put on your Brooks Brothers clothes and your slick slackers and get in the streets and fight this. Excuse my language, that's bullshit. That's the insane, that's the insanity of white supremacy. That you cannot combat it with the same thing that they kill you with. So Darren Wilson and the Ferguson PD can come into the Canfield Green apartment complex, shoot Mike Brown in execution style, because there's no reason for 2 bullets in the head. That's the whole part of the story that just kills me. 2 shots to the head, man. Like, come on. It's what you do to a bear. You know, like that really shows you what Darren Wilson viewed his view of Mike Brown was. And that shows you the insane nature of America and how we treat racism. Like, this kid took 2 bullets to the head, and then there's narrative about, other things. So, with that said, Ferguson is a militant, nonviolent resistance front. And I think it's important that we own that, because a lot of people have criticized us on the ground for the hands up, don't shoot. They say, well, you got your hands in the air, man, you need to turn them into fists. The same people saying, why you got your hands in the air, you ain't turned them into fists. Same people sitting at home watching it on CNN. You didn't go out in your streets and start any type of commotion when somebody was gunned down. You're watching me on CNN accusing me of surrendering, but I'm in front of a tank. So that makes no sense to me. Like, the entire nature of the situation is designed around resistance. Come to Ferguson, talk to some young kid with his shirt off and a bandana around his face and tattoos on his eyelids, and tell him that this means surrender, and see what happens to you. So, the way that we continued this for real is just that, there's many different answers to that question, right? We were blessed to have assistance from our brothers and sisters in Palestine. They came out there when the tear gas started erupting. A young lady from Palestine taught us how to make homemade gas masks. And there's a piece, that piece combines struggles. It globalizes Ferguson. It gives us a moment of relativity for people who are in other pieces of the struggle. It shows us that, even though I've never been to that portion of the world, you're going through the same thing I'm going through. We know how to communicate. We're up against the same exact monster. They demonize you in the media, they demonize us in the media. They justify killing you, they justify killing me. It's the same exact world, different language. Why not connect? So things like that kind of show you the difference in our generation and the previous, necessarily. Because I went to one of the pastors and I said, we should do a solidarity march with some of the Arab community members, just to, connect these struggles and get that support.
Because there's a big Muslim community in St. Louis.
Huge,
right?
huge. And she was worried about funders and a bunch of other crap. And I was like, man, you missed what this moment is actually about. Like, this moment is actually about, we don't care about any of that. And I think that's why we were able to sustain it, and we are sustaining it, is because we don't care about the political agenda from the previous class. We're not trying to be safe. We're not trying to make this look a certain way to make people comfortable.
Right.
We're throwing respectability politics out the window. And we're holding each other to a level of accountability that's different than past generations.
And that's what I mean too, is right. How do you, really, how do you do that, right? Because again, the narrative that's out here in the public is going to say, well, you don't have the organizational infrastructure to hold people accountable, right? So
right.
The story about the civil rights movement is you're coming out of these churches, you don't show up at the march, you got to show up on church on Sunday, and nobody's going to sit with you. Everybody's going to be talking bad about you because you weren't there.
So
where's the
it's realism. Like, it's real when you standing in front of a tank or armored vehicle, or MRAP, or a guy with body armor and an M16 in your face, next to a person you never knew. I don't know y'all. Front line. I'm black, you black, he's white. We never met. But obviously at this moment, something in our core beliefs aligns. We may disagree on a bunch of other stuff, but we agree enough to be out here in the middle of the street in West Florissant to fight this. So from there, the narrative that we can create with each other, it's different than a Barack Obama and a Jesse Jackson. It's different than when Al Sharpton came there and he marched down the street and he went to the church every other day, because we're physically putting ourselves on the line. We're not just talking about it, and that's what black liberation has lacked in America. There's this ginormous misconception that black people are liberated in America. We are not. Black liberation in America will not occur until we stop gathering in rooms like this to discuss racism and physically contribute our bodies to that liberation. You cannot have a casual revolution in America. I now wholeheartedly believe that. I used to think it was possible because I'm an American and that's how I grew up. I'm not saying you got to go get M16s and AK-47s and take to the streets, but I am saying that you have to physically contribute to fighting oppression. I could not sit at home and watch the tanks on CNN 5 minutes from my mama's house. I had to go out there and physically contribute to the situation. And I think that's how we've sustained it. By everybody knows that you're held to a level of a different level of accountability. My homeboy was on the front lines one day, the guy that I started Hands Up United with, Torian Russell. He was right at the very face-to-face with the drama. And he was with a bunch of guys that he didn't know. And he said, look, man, this is all about resistance. We don't have any other point at this moment but to resist this, to let them know that we are human. You just can't come to our neighborhood and militarize it. You just can't shoot us down in the street and expect us to go home and go to sleep. We are resisting. Right. If you are scared to resist, go home. Now's the time to go home and watch me die on TV because you're scared. And that same night, they shot a tear gas canister at him. He picked it up. He didn't have gloves on, almost lost his thumb because he threw it back. And that defines what we're doing to me. It's, okay, you're gonna come to my neighborhood, shoot pregnant women with rubber bullets. I have to pull children out of tear gas, but I'm wrong for throwing it back at you? Mm-hmm. No, not today. And that's how we've sustained it. There's no fear mechanism when you come to Ferguson. I tell people all the time, they be like, man, we want to come to Ferguson. I said, I hope you realize if you come in the heat of a moment that's volatile, you could die. So don't play with this.
Right. I'll ask you a question. You talked a little bit about civil rights leaders of the last generation, of whom you've been pretty critical in the Riverfront Times. Also, you've been pretty critical of some of the, I think the title of one of the editorials was "Hip-Hop Has Failed Us." And so I'm interested in both the generational rollover that you feel, that you're talking about or articulating in black politics, and then also what you are asking for or feeling the lack of from your own generation. Hip-hop is failing us. That's
for me, I think about that article a lot because some of my opinions are harsh in that article. But when I wrote it, I was really knee-deep in the middle of all the different things going on with West Florissant and just the police pushing on us every day. So my feelings were kind of hurt about certain things. Yeah, rappers like Young Jeezy, who I'm like a Jeezy fan, but he came to Ferguson like 6 o'clock in the morning and took a picture at the Quick Trip. And I was kind of like, man, that's kind of whack, man. Like, come out here when have the same level of risk that I have. Because coming to West Florissant for me is not a photo op. And while I admired that he showed up, I just didn't like the format in which it was done.
All the cops were in the donut shop at 6 a.m.
But so if I could be very honest, the women showed up and the men didn't. And hip-hop deals a lot with misogyny and patriarchy and things of that nature. And as a hip-hop artist, I'm constantly battling that stuff within myself and checking myself at the door. And I have moments where I'm guilty. You caught me red-handed. But after Ferguson, I've really began to really reanalyze even my approach to hip-hop as a culture, hip-hop as a genre. And what you see out there in the form of the way that the protest looks, to me, is reflective of the hip-hop generation. You have young men and women who are not trying to be PC with their approach. They're using profanity. The language isn't lay down and die. It's not centered in voting rights. It's really rebellious by nature. I think like one of the last great radical revolutionary voices of the hip-hop generation was probably Tupac Shakur. And Tupac has a very awesome quote that says, a lady asked him, what are you gonna do? What happens if they kill you? And he was like, oh, if they take me out the game, you know, the person after me is gonna be merciless. So that's what you're witnessing. You're witnessing a generation that has seen all of our leaders either co-op or die. So there's no, and we've registered like 3,000 people to vote in Ferguson. But so even though I understand voting rights is a part of it, what my generation can't rely on that for a win.
Well, when there's 12,000 outstanding arrest warrants, who's going to go register to vote?
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean that struck me as one of the most boneheaded things that Reverend Sharpton said when he said that you're not voting is an insult to your children.
Yeah.
I mean there's a third of the population of Ferguson has an outstanding arrest warrant for these picayune traffic tickets.
So we go to the Ferguson Police Department the next day after Mike Brown was murdered, August 10th. So all types of people out there, man. It was like a Black Power mixtape. Like, it was all types of folks. Like, Cats showed up, the Nation showed up. First time in life I ever seen like actual Black Panthers. Like, I'm like, dang, man, this is kind of crazy. So Panthers there, Nation there, then the church is there. It's all different demographics of Black folks. And everybody's trying to fill their space out in that moment. And I always refer back to this moment because it's kind of the moment where you decided what the resistance would look like for you, what protesting would look like for you, who you would align yourself with. So you had cats that were like really mind blown by the Black Panther presence, so they joined the new Black Panther Party. Then you had people who liked the way that the Nation of Islam did a really dramatic entrance where they crossed the street and they came from one side and the other group of them came from this side. They had the suits on, they were marching in uniform, and we looked like, oh yeah, it's going down. And then they got the front line to the cops and they just stared at them. But it was crazy because like people were like, yeah, man, move, let them brothers through, let them brothers through. I was like, I don't know what we expected them to do, but
Right.
you know, so it was crazy. So stuff like that happened, right? But the Ferguson Police Department started sending out like whatever Black people they could that worked for Ferguson to talk to us. So it would be people who had nothing to do with it. Like some dude like owned a daycare, and he was like, it was weird, man. So this lady comes out, and she's like talking about voting and stuff, right? And I'm like, now's not the time to really do that. Like, these people have no answers whatsoever, and you want to talk about, well, we need to vote. What the hell does voting have to do with racial profiling at this very moment? I get it. It's connected through the political scope of America, and we want to, oh, if you're gay, if you want rights, go vote. No, how about I'm human? You just give me my shit. You know? So she's coming out giving us all these excuses about the whole situation. And I'm like, I said, excuse me, ma'am. You're actually talking to politicized Black folks. Like, we're the people that did go vote. So you got to give us real answers. You just can't tell us to go vote. This ain't going to work. Like, that's not going to work this time. Sorry. Yahtzee, got you. So she was confused because she thought she would be talking to, like, Pookie and Ray Ray. But it just didn't go down like that.
There's a little bit more about St. Louis, but you were talking about the Muslim population in St. Louis, and I know that something that you have thought about a lot and worked on some is a relationship between the black community and the Bosnian community in St. Louis. For those of you who don't know, the largest Bosnian community outside of Europe is in St. Louis, and that's been a tense and sometimes violent relationship. I'm just interested in hearing you reflect on that in relationship to your emerging commitment around Palestine and that kind of set of issues.
It's crazy because I feel like the events surrounding Mike Brown's murder and just the Ferguson, I don't like to use the term riots and stuff. I don't like to use the term looting. I feel like that's dry snitching on my people. So you very seldom hear me go, oh yeah, the riots. Because, I mean, that ain't my job. Like, you're going to hit CNN and Don Lemon going to call it a riot enough, you know? So I call it the uprising, the rebellion, you know? So the events surrounding the uprising, to me, when they started to go international, a lot of my friends in the Arab community really held us down. The first reporter to really talk about the situation on an international level was actually my friend Sarah that works for Al Jazeera. She just started retweeting whatever I put out, and before I knew it, it just popped. She doesn't really get the credit she deserves because she to me really made it go global. And she understands social media and the social media generation a lot better than a lot of journalists. So what this situation did for me, and I think a lot of people, it reminded folks that black people in America have not bought into the notion of that we are liberated, that we are a part of the class of this society that is winning, whatever that class is. It realigned us with some of the globalist and international ideologies of what it means to be an American. Like, you know, now my homeboy that lives in Morocco can feel me now. You know, he's like, man, we've been waiting on y'all. Everybody else across the world we got it, but we've been waiting on y'all. So I feel like it's our coming out party. It's our welcome to the party. You know, we're back. We're back, y'all. 4 years of Obama, we bought into it for a little minute, but now we're back. So that's what it represents for me. So like now, it's not just about, you know, honoring the plight of my community more so, but also understanding the plights of other communities, you know what I mean? And really learning whatever I can learn from them. In St. Louis, we have a huge problem with the blacks and the Bosnians, man, and it's bigger than me. I don't know how to fix it for real, but we got to start somewhere, and hopefully we can start with this situation right here. St. Louis is a very segregated city. You don't leave your circle of people. Like whatever you're into, you know everybody that's into that. And it works like that for whether you're black, white, Bosnian, Latino, Hispanic, whatever. So what we're trying to do is just tear down some of those walls that keep people separated, and also just throw some of these stereotypes of each other out the window, you know? Because, I mean, they face the same problems with policing that we face. And to be honest, it may be, in St. Louis, it may be harsher because they don't have a community of people that's going to fight back like we did for Mike Brown. So, yeah, man, it's just about connecting those dots and connecting those worlds. You can't have, I don't want to be a part of a moment that's only symbolic for black men. I don't want to be a part of a moment that's only symbolic for heterosexual black men. I don't want to be a part of a moment that's only symbolic for black people. I want to be a part of a moment that's symbolic for oppressed people, period.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, I mean, I think, like, I mean, That's a beautiful way you phrased it, because I think one of the things that's going to confront this moment, like immediately, is the fact that, you know, it's easier to get black solidarity around a question like what happened to Mike Brown, right? Because you get middle class mothers who can imagine, and so you read the New York Times, you read CNN, there's all of these, you know, what am I going to tell my son, right? The Yale Black Men's Union had a thing, to my unborn son, right? And so these are, I mean, the most elite black people, the middle class black people, poor black people, all seem to think, okay, well, we can get some kind of solidarity around being uniquely vulnerable to a split-second decision by a police officer. But as you pointed out, and as Walter's pointed out in some of his writings, and if you've read some of the great reporting by the Washington Post, it's deeper than that, right? That these practices of policing, extractive policing, trying to charge people fines, move the court dates, put people in basically debtor's prison, right? Lock people up for years, take them away from their family, exploit their families to charge them because commissary is too expensive, the phone calls are too expensive, right? So all of these extractive things that they're doing, they're not targeted toward all black people. Right. They're targeted toward a certain communities, poor people. Right. And so one of my questions for you is, you know, when you start bringing those things up and people start checking out, right, because they don't want to beef with the energy company in St. Louis, they don't want to beef with, you know, their law firm, right? What's the move there, right? How do you? I mean, this is one thing to talk about other kinds of solidarity, but I was just wondering if you could talk about if you guys are prepared or have thought a little bit about, particularly that scene you painted with all the different black organizations, because you know how diverse and how disagreeable the thing is.
I think for us, the power is in keeping it youth oriented, because we haven't been tainted by a certain aspect of the political process yet. Steve Jobs has a quote that says, "Stay foolish." Because if you stay foolish, you don't believe that I can't turn this into a mountain. So, you know, I'm foolish enough to believe that I could do that. So, a lot of us that are organizing in Ferguson are people who, I haven't had any real big L's yet, any losses for real. You know, as an organizer, maybe my loss was, you know, Darren Wilson not getting indicted. But, I mean, how much of that was really in our hands? So I believe right now that we're still in a moment that we don't have much clarity about where we're going. And a lot of people say, well, if you don't have the clarity, you're not organized. Well, I just got back from the White House. I just got back from the UN. I'm from the ghetto. These people call me. So it takes a certain level of organization to pull that off. But within the same time, we don't want to have too much foresight about what we're doing, because we're trying to use the edge of doing the impossible. We want to feel as if we're under the gun. We want to grow at a very organic pace, you know? So that includes making some mistakes, taking on some targets that are going to kick our ass. But in the process, hopefully, we pull some of them down to our level. I think you go about that by just not being afraid to be real with yourself. And I think a lot of people from the previous class, the previous generation, they have different concerns and different priorities than I have, or some of the other organizers. So some conversations with them are just totally unrealistic. I remember, once again, my friend Tori Russell, second week into this, he's like, man, we canceling Christmas, we canceling Thanksgiving, canceling Halloween. I said, man, that's impossible. We ain't doing that. And it sounded like the dumbest idea in the world to me, too. He was like, no, we're canceling all the holidays. And then he kept saying that. Every strategy meeting, everybody would laugh at him. And he also said something crazy, too. He said, you know, what we're going to do is, if they don't want to acknowledge us as humans, then we take it to the UN. And he said, you know, we don't have any false conceived notions about the UN doing anything for us, but when have you seen some young black kids from the ghetto on the floor of the UN charging America with genocide? So for us, it's all about going against these big monsters, these big targets. We don't have any outlandish ideas about what we're going to accomplish, but we just want to introduce people to the party that have never been introduced. I'm introducing the Crips and the Bloods. I'm introducing the GDs and the Vice Lords to the Emerson Electric CEO. You know, he knows that if we speak on action and we have a demand, you don't concede to that demand in St. Louis, you don't know who I'm going to bring to Emerson Electric on Monday. And that's the scary part about it right now. We play into the fear of black people when organizing. We use it to our advantage. And
Can you talk to me about Emerson? I've been working on Emerson. Emerson is pretty, so Emerson has managed, I think, pretty much to fly under the radar on this. Emerson Electric, for those who don't know, they have the headquarters of a $24 billion a year company is 300 yards from where Michael Brown got murdered. It's in Ferguson.
Yeah.
They got 152 acres.
Yeah.
They have 7 buildings.
Yeah.
They built a $60 million data center in 2009 on tax abatements. They pay taxes on a property assessment of $11 million, which is multiplied by 0.32 down to $4 million. City of Ferguson gets $50,000 from Emerson Electric. So I'm interested. That's enough to buy a brand new Chevy Tahoe police car, right? So I mean, and so that guy's meeting with you, Cap or Nap or whatever his name
we've
is?
had some meetings, not myself personally, but different people that I work with.
Yeah, well, tell him I'm on to him.
We just tell them we want some jobs. I'll relay the message. But now the conversation we had with him was, we just want some jobs, man.
Yep.
You're here, people are unemployed, you're in the community, so employ people of the community, you know?
Yeah, there was this big piece in Science that just got released, the journal Science, and one of the things they were able to find as criminologists from Pennsylvania is that one of the most effective things at reducing youth violence is just jobs, like summer jobs, like little jobs. And it's like obvious to anybody who's done this work, particularly people from Boston who know all of the kind of agitation for youth jobs. But you got this, I mean, it's one of these things. I mean, one of the struggles with this, and I'd like to ask you this too, is that, so when thinking a lot about protests, you know, I think a lot of what we think about right now is how do we be provocative? How are we provocative? And that's what we've done. I mean, what's amazing about this is for the first time in so long, these protests feel provocative, right? You've got people putting their lives on the line. You've got athletes who, you know, when we were growing up, you know, Jordan, these guys would have never done these protests. I mean, Charles Barkley is the most reactionary person out. But that's a little older than me. But you know, you've got LeBron wearing the "I Can't Breathe" shirt. You got these guys out, and so we've done a lot about provocation. But one of the things that's hard, and it speaks to what you're talking about with the electric company, is the other two pieces of it. It's like pedagogy and politics. So how do we think about protests as a teachable moment, right? So one of the things that was so powerful about civil rights movement is people were like, okay, well, this is a private space. You go into Woolworths, that's just Woolworths making the decision about who they can serve and how. But then people reveal that it's the protest reveals that it's the police that enforce that. It's these public order statutes that enforce that. It's the state behind that, and it's the state that's denying people their citizenship. How do we teach people that, you know, this electric company is running these complicated schemes so they all that Ferguson gets is $50,000 at Mike Brown's high school. And I'm learning all this stuff just from Walter.
And then they didn't even give it to the right school either.
No, Normandy, right? They gave it to.
They gave it to the wrong school, and we had to go back and tell them, hey, you cut the check for the wrong school. They got confused because once again, there's 97 municipalities in St. Louis. You never know which municipality.
Well, for those of you who don't know, the 97 municipalities in St. Louis County, the reason that exists is that as African-American people tried to move out of the city to the county, all the unincorporated areas of the county incorporated to pass laws to make it impossible for black people to move there. So anytime there was a possibility that there would be an apartment complex built, they'd incorporate one of these tiny little municipalities to put into effect zoning laws which ban multi-unit housing. So you get then this pattern of all these tiny little municipalities that now has become a vehicle for this kind of policing that Tef was talking about.
Yeah. But to answer that question, it's all about political education.
Right.
So a lot of people think that we're just taking to the streets, yelling, and going home, right? But they don't know, like at Hands Up United, we have an office. We run political education courses out of there.
Mm-hmm.
We run a bunch of different programs. We have a monthly program called Breakfast and Books. We feed kids and we give them books. We take book donations from all around the world. And the books are usually centered in a piece of history or a piece of the black experience that they won't learn in school.
Yeah.
We're beginning to establish like freedom school courses. And our whole thing, man, is this. We don't want, okay, so the civil rights movement, I talk to Harry Belafonte all the time, and me and him, we differ in approach. And it's hard to talk to him sometimes because his approach is always centered in getting into the system like Hydra did S.H.I.E.L.D. for the comic book nerds out there. And kind of having this grand moment of when, you know, the system wakes up and goes, oh my God, they're in the building, we didn't know it. And then, so, I mean, and I feel like they did that already. You know, like, they should pat themselves on the back. They got the black president. But the thing is, the system is the system. So the part of the conversation that they don't want to have, and this is just being real, and I think that being a part of this moment has forced me to be real about a lot of things. The downfall of the civil rights movement, to a certain degree, was a certain level of unacknowledged sexism and patriarchy, as well as homophobia. So there was moments where it just wasn't all inclusive. So like the gay kid in North County doesn't have to worry about coming to Hands Up United and being afraid to be gay, because you could come in here and sit in these political education courses and rock out, and we don't care. Right. You know, if I'm on the front line of, you know, I'm on the front line at the police station, and they're about to tear gases, you know, I've stood next to a gay white dude that had more heart than the toughest looking black dude. So for us, it's just education. Education is a strong component, and also acceptance, because if I don't want to, like I said, I just don't want to sit in a room and build another generation of people that just look like me. You know, I'm not here for that.
I think we should start throwing this open. Yeah. Do you want me to call on people? Do you want to do it? Tough. You want me to just?
Cool. You do.
All right. Why don't we start right over here?
So we have the microphone for archive.
Okay. Great. So yeah, we're gonna, and you know, you just identify yourself somehow. Let us know who's in the house.
Peace. Damon Sajnani. I'm the Nazir Jones Hip Hop Fellow here at the Archive. I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for your comments, and mostly thank you for your work that you're doing. I really appreciate it. You've touched on this already, so I'm going to ask you for any further comments you want. But when I watched the prosecutor McCulloch give his speech, one of the things that jumped out at me right away, there, of course, people have very visceral reactions because it was so ridiculous, this performance. But one of the things that really struck me was when, you know, how he was supposedly encouraging people to have protests. Like, we want you to have your protest. We want you to go out and do this and have your nonviolent protests. Subtext is, moment you step outside of this particular box that we want you to have, you know, we got something for you.
Yeah.
And as you said, from the very, very beginning, that was preemptively, you know, preordained. It was preemptive. Yeah. So one of the biggest problems, of course, if your enemy is endorsing your tactics, then you need some different kinds of tactics.
Right.
And then and the whole and one thing that really struck me, you know, with CNN talking about, you know, they're getting tear gas and stuff, and then, oh no, it was so great, but now the protesters are getting violent, and you have this frame set up, which you've touched on, this sort of box where there is a particular type of respectable protest that is allowed. But I think what needs to happen on a national scale is questioning these kinds of narratives, these kinds of boxes. First of all, what constitutes violence? Because they're calling a lot of things violent that shouldn't necessarily be called violent. And second, we have to talk about when is violence justified in the face of violence.
Right.
So, for instance, civil disobedience is breaking the law. Yeah. So why is destruction of property or confiscation of property, which sometimes is framed under looting, why is that not legitimate in certain circumstances? So I think these are the kinds of conversations which I think you guys are already having, and I think that needs to happen on a wider scale because one important part of activism, no counter-hegemonic movement is ever going to succeed that takes on face value the definition of terms by the oppressor.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's man, you so on the money with this, man. What you just said kind of defines like how we feel about it on the ground. You know what I'm saying? Like, so Bob McCulloch is the devil in my mind. Just to be real about it. It's amazing that the media doesn't really pull out some things about his character. Like if you even look at the way, like what they're doing in Ferguson is a psyops experiment. All right, Mike Brown dying and being left in the street is one thing. That's negligence on behalf of St. Louis County and Ferguson Police Department. But that response with the militarized police and later on with the National Guard, totally different agenda. They don't tell people that, I think it was like 2012, they were bringing in militarized weapons into St. Charles County, which is one of the more affluent areas in St. Louis. And it's like the fastest growing economical suburb in Missouri, I think. And they were storing like actual tanks. And I know a lot of times we use tanks to describe what an MRAP is, but no, they were literally bringing tanks into St. Charles, military tanks, driving around in the streets. And then there was a news story, you can see it on YouTube, people asking, where are these weapons? Why are these weapons in St. Charles? And they were like, oh, don't worry, we're just doing drills. There's another real crazy incident that we all used to laugh at, because I got a bunch of crazy conspiracy theory friends, and I used to be a bit of a conspiracy theorist myself, but then I just got older and started looking at stuff from a different lens. But there was this video of this guy calling into, he was a cop, he claimed to be a police officer. And everybody in St. Louis talked about this because we would all laugh at it. He called into a radio station and he was crying, and he said they're attempting to bring martial law to St. Louis. And he was like, there's some very evil and powerful people in place, and they're going to do some things by August that are going to, no, he said October, that are, they're going to kill people, they're going to do all types of stuff. There's this other cop, there's a cop that was relieved from duty, former military guy. I can't remember his name, I think it's Dan Smith or something like that. But there's a video of him and Don Lemon. Don Lemon's interviewing someone, and this cop walks up to Don Lemon and like does this fake, really passive fake push, and he's like, you gotta go, get out of here, get out of here, right? And the people are moving back, and Don Lemon's moving back, and Don Lemon's kind of smiling like, what are you doing, sir? Don't push me. And that was fake. That was mock. That was not real, right? That was set up. They were acting. So when I started to really look into like the militarized response of the situation, you see some things that make your heart drop to your stomach. They did some similar things in Oakland, where they would show up in Oakland and run like these, they would pay people to participate in these scenarios centered in martial law. And they do it in the black community, and people take the check because they're like, oh man, it's a check to go do whatever, right? But they're setting up something. I don't know what it is, but I talked to my friend Phil Agnew from the Dream Defenders, And he told this to Barack Obama, actually. He said, you know, the next phase of America's attack on minorities in this country is not the war on drugs. The war on drugs is over. The next phase of that is the militarization of urban communities. And it's making people see it from a lens that says that's okay. So when you look at something like Ferguson, you look at somebody like Bob McCulloch, who released the verdict, or the decision, because it wasn't a verdict, at nighttime. That entire day, I'm scratching my head like, why would he release this at night? And I'm operating from a logical lens that says, you don't want the city to burn down. But when you look into it, they've had plans to gentrify West Florissant since 2012. This isn't a conspiracy. This is all on paper. This is real. So we're playing two different games. We're playing the game of we want rights. What y'all did is wrong. Arrest Darren Wilson. They're playing the game of let's let this property burn down so we can bring in our economic agenda.
What's up, Murray Foreman? I'm an incoming NAS fellow here at the archive. Thank you, brother, for being here and for your work also. As we're talking about generational distinctions, you know, revolutionary moments and generational distinctions, I can't help but remark on the age of the cops, the murdering cops that we're talking about as well in many cases, whether it's going to Oscar Grant, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, Mr. Gurley in Brooklyn. These cops are rookies or young cops. So I'm thinking they too, not just these individuals, but young policemen are capable of revolutionary moments and revolutionary enlightenment as well. So I'm wondering if, in your experience, and maybe it's still too hot for this conversation and dialogue, are you encountering younger cops who say, brother, we get this. Yeah. You know, we are working in the system, and we want to change the system too. And it's a powerful system, it's a hard system, it's resistant to revolution from within. Are you encountering young cops who are capable of having that conversation and maybe moving towards a revolution of the police forces that might make a difference for the way they and their forces handle their shit, their business out in the street?
I think that's rooted in like police culture. Policing in this country has a really jacked up culture. We went to a black police officer's house off the record in secret. It's not off the record now, I just told y'all. But we went to his house like August 10th or August 11th. It was right after the murder. He didn't know we were coming, and we popped up, myself, Tory, and one of the older activists named Brother Shahid, the cat that you probably seen on TV with like the dogs and the police hat. It's a wild dude. So we went to this cop's house, man, and we talked to him, and he was basically on some like, yo, if I ride with y'all, who's going to defend me? Right. I still have to go to work. And that's something that I think this whole situation nationwide struggles with. Like last night when I was in New York, the cops would say stuff to the protesters like, get a job. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you assume that I don't have a job? Like, some of these people have PhDs, man. Like, right. I know particularly one of the persons I was marching with was a doctor. Right. So I think in order to really achieve that, we have to make the police pull out of the matrix. They have to unplug from the matrix a little bit. But in order to be a cop, you have to be a certain level of plugged into the matrix. Like, it takes a very specific type of person to say, I want to be a police officer. Yeah. Yeah. And right.
Well, and just two other pieces to that. I mean, one of the difficulties, and we had a forum a couple months ago with Patricia Williams, and she wrote about this in The Guardian. And you know, we recruit a lot of police officers from the military, right? So people come home from the military and they go into these police forces. And people are dealing with real trauma. They're dealing with training that trains them to react to difference in a certain kind of way, to to not take any challenge to authority
Yes.
in a certain kind of way. So we really got to rethink
Yes.
with the relationship between, I mean, talk about militarization of police. I mean, that's at a demographic level.
Yeah.
And then the second piece, and this is a thing that is always frightening to me about any politics on this issue, is that you're confronting the one union
can't
in the
compete.
country
Come on,
that's
man.
getting more powerful.
Come on.
Right? The police unions, the correctional officers unions, and these people have enormous political sway. The Fraternal Order of Police head was on Meet the Press on Sunday.
Come on,
he
man.
began the comments. He said, I want to start by saying we do not have a systemic problem in this country.
Come on.
I'm going to begin with that.
Come on.
And the only problem is that you guys say we need more training. I mean, that's a liberal ameliorative answer. We need more training. Well, police officers always want more training. That's what he said. We always want more training.
Right.
The problem is we've been cutting the budgets. So if we get some more money, we can do this.
Man.
So we've got to figure out a way to split the police unions on this issue, challenge the police unions without losing the very defense of collective bargaining for municipal employees altogether.
I can't lie to you, man. I ain't gonna lie to y'all. Before I got involved in this whole Ferguson stuff, I didn't like police, naturally. I'm young, I'm black, they've been messing with me, you know. We don't have the best relationship. I didn't like them, but I can tell you now, I hate police. I don't have any reservations about saying that because it's literally the modern day extension of the damn KKK. Right. Like, they have no accountability. Their track record is flawless when it comes to murdering people that are innocent. Like, and this is what I present to America. Like, if it's legal for police officers to murder whom they choose, when they choose, how they choose, just put it on paper then. Because the stats prove it. If you look at the track record suggests that this is actually legal. They don't get indicted. They don't go to jail. When they do go to jail, it's not to the fullest extent of the law. Darren Wilson shot Mike Brown, left him in the middle of the street 4.5 hours, man. You kill somebody, go outside and shoot somebody and see if you can leave them in the street for 4 hours. I dare you. Try it. No questioning, no detainment. He shot that boy, went home and had a steak. Then got hundreds of thousands of dollars to go on ABC and say he'd do it again. If I had the opportunity, I would do it again.
And what we're not talking about is he's a hero to a large number of people. Right. Yes. That's also something.
But so you look at this, in America, people feed into, poor people do this all the time. And I think police are a great example of this. And poor white people do this better than any demographic of people in the country. They feed into the assumption and the BS dreams that America has created for poor people to say that, you know what, you don't have what I have. You're not fully included into the system. This wasn't...
We're past conspiracy thinking, though. We said, didn't we? We're past conspiracy thinking.
That's crazy.
It's probably the basement flooded.
Oh, yeah.
I guess
I think the basement flooded.
the basement flooded. Because like I say, you set the house on fire. I think what we're gonna do is let's just keep on going. You know, they can come up and throw us
see what
out.
happens.
The problem is it's so loud. Yeah. All right. So we're just gonna keep going right over this. All right. So we're gonna have to raise our voices. Yes, ma'am. From Xavier.
Hi, my name is Adia Wallace, and I'm a graduate student at Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I just wanted to ask a question about, I guess, engaging people at a privileged position. So a few weeks ago, when the non-indictment happened of Officer Darren Wilson, there were plans to hold I guess a protest, or at least, a sit-in, in front of the Roxbury police headquarters, which is, Roxbury is a hood of Boston. And so it happened, and the next day, the Boston Globe, they, did an unofficial poll and found out that most of the protesters were people who were outside of the Boston area, or at least outside of Boston proper. So these were, college students from Cambridge and surrounding areas who were, coming in to protest. And at first I was like, oh, that's so cool, I'm from Mississippi, having, different demographics to come out and, show their support, that's really admirable. But then I start to think about it, and I said that these are probably people who this is their first and last time in Roxbury. And so because of that, once you come in, so for instance, right now this conversation is happening in Cambridge. It's not happening in Dorchester. I live in Dorchester. When I tell people I live in Dorchester, I commute 2 hours a day, to and from school and from work. People automatically say, oh my gosh, like why the hell would you do that? And it's the same mentality where it's you have, I guess, reservations about those poor people, and you think that the hood is some place that you have to police, or at least you have to remove yourself from. And once you remove yourself from, people in these different contexts, that's when you have this mentality of I versus them. And so how do we, engage, I guess, at least go into these, these communities and really, talk with, people within those communities and have this type of dialogue? Because me being at Harvard, a lot of people, me being in Dorchester, a lot of people, they're surprised that I'm there, being from, at Harvard, because they don't interact with Harvard students that much. And so that was basically my question.
I think you have to show people, it's all about humanity, first of all. Like, everybody's a human. And the same, we all want the same things, man. That's like the bottom line. And this actually connects with the previous point I wanted to make, is that poor white people are fed into the assumption that the system will eventually be all inclusive of them, which it won't, So that's why they have a problem with, like, wealth distribution, because they like, when I get rich, I don't want to have to do that. Well, you're never going to get rich. Newsflash. So we have to reduce the struggle to just human necessity and human emotion. And that's what I learned from being out there in the streets with the people. Claire McCaskill, she can't respond in a humane way because she has all these roadblocks: the law, prestige, degrees, just presentation. I think that we have to try to find a way to talk to people that strikes what's naturally inside of them. Nobody really has to tell you that you shouldn't go outside and murder somebody. I seriously don't think someone should have to explain to you that rape is wrong. Like, if there's a disconnect on that, first of all, let's start right there. If there's a disconnect with you and that, then I really shouldn't have no more words for you, for real. And I think also we got to start with that too. So, like, when you have these conversations with people and they can't see the humanity in you, they can't see that you actually feel passionate about this, that you feel that this is wrong. At some point, we as the people that are right, we as the righteous community have to say, you know what, y'all wrong, hands off. I can't spend my entire lifetime explaining racism to white people that just don't want to get it, and that's not my responsibility, because I didn't create it, Like, I have this line in one of my songs. I said, they say I shouldn't say nigga, but they the ones that made niggas. So, like, how you gonna tell me that I can no longer say nigga? Like, you called us niggas for 400 years. Now that I say it, hey, what are you doing? Come on, man.
Yeah, right over here. Well, I'm calling on you. Yeah.
Thank you. I really like how y'all checked the male privilege and handed it to the black woman instead. How you doing, Tev?
How you doing?
Everybody else on the panel? No, I'm kidding. So a couple of things. My name is Kendra, and I am a resident of Roxbury, a community organizer, former street worker, person from the community. So, I mean, I had some reactions to some of the questions that were happening, but also just I've been to Ferguson twice already, and just trying to kind of connect to the stuff that's happening here in Boston, just particularly because of and Harvard, right, and kind of trying to connect those dots, just as someone who's from the community locally, right. One, the media is going to report what the media is going to report. They're going to spin it how they're going to spin it. The police department has been trolling us since we had all of those protests, saying thank you for all the peaceful protesters. We're proud of our city, like on their tweets and in the, right? So they're going to spin it however they're going to spin it, right? Here in Boston, when we pushed the police line, we asked the white allies to come to the front. Those white allies were college students, so the people who were arrested, as reported by the Boston Globe, were people who weren't from Boston, right? It wasn't because the people wasn't holding it down, right? Because the Roxbury's my hood, I grew up around there, we're the one doing it, right? Just to be absolutely clear about what's happening and how the media is trying to spin it to make it seem like, oh, Boston is like, no, we're fine, we don't have an issue here. Mind you that we had one of the biggest turnouts in the country after the verdict, hands down. So that's just one thing about that. And just when talking about engaging these communities who are like the poor black people, like, yes, the people in the colleges, y'all have an analysis. Everybody's like super educated. We understand racism. We can talk about this. We will show up to the rallies. We will talk to white allies, but nobody's gonna go in the projects in Heath Street and get these people to come to show up to these rallies. Right. Also, as a person who comes from a place of privilege, it's not your job to go in the hood and talk to any of those people, right? Like, it's about supporting the people who are from those neighborhoods to be able to have those conversations. Because from where I come from, there's nobody from Harvard coming into my neighborhood and telling us how to be accountable to the stuff that's happening right now. So I would say that as far as like what your job is as a person of color who's like here at Harvard is like, there needs to be other ways to find how to support it and support the community who's doing the work already and the people who are in the hood, tying in the people from the hood to the work. Like, we don't want to create spaces where we have people from privileged spaces coming into our communities and asking us, hey, what can we do to help y'all? Because we have, not only do we have all our other stuff going on, it's like this is an added trauma on top of all of the things that we were already experiencing in our neighborhoods. Like, we already have high levels of violence. We already have high levels of homelessness. Women are already experiencing all of these other things in our communities. Like, this is on another level. And like Tef said, it's not really our job to get all of these people together. It's our job to like get ourselves together. So like, if you want to know how do you integrate yourself into a community, you support the people who are already there doing the thing. Like, it's really not your job to step in and do this. There is a role for people at Harvard. There is a role for people who are professional organizers. There is a role for people who get paid to do this. Absolutely. It is not to go into the hood and talk to us about how to do what we're doing, because the people who are there are like, we're talking about it, right? So yeah, I just wanted to.
You got to find ambassadors of the hood. Like, I can't go to certain communities in St. Louis myself. Like, there's people who consider me a square. Like, I'm talking to y'all at Harvard, yo. Like, can't go back to like certain areas in the Lou, man, and be like, and have certain conversations with people without having certain people around me. And that comes from not being scared of black folks. Like, black folks got to stop being scared of black folks, for real. Right. And a lot of people like, I don't even want to say his name, I can't, but it's a particular brother that works for CNN that I'm cool with, and y'all figure it out. But, you know, I ain't like how it is not Don Lemon, but I didn't like how he was covering stuff the night of the decision. Because he was like running up into like the Ferguson market, and we had to like take his phone and be like, bro, why would you film that? Like, he catching people carrying cases and stuff out. I'm like, bro, like, we get it, it's happening. But that ain't your job to put it on blast, fam. Like, so we had to take his phone, you know, and delete some stuff, man. But, you know, it starts with black people having, like, respect for each other. Like, and you can't organize the hood if you're scared to talk to the dude with all gold teeth. You know what I'm saying? And I always ask people, yeah, you want to come out here and protest now that Mike Brown is dead, but the night that Von Derek Myers died on the South Side, and the community decided that the right thing to do was physically remove the police from that site where he died, where were you at? Because Ferguson ain't the hood, for real, if we want to be honest about that. CNN has done a great job making people think that Ferguson is like the ghetto. Like, Mike Brown was like the only homicide they had at that time, you know? And that was at the hands of the police. So in a different space, in a different community, this looks different. When you're on the south side of St. Louis and there's a kid that everybody believes was unarmed and shot for nothing. The entire energy is drastically different than Ferguson. Yeah. There's no letting the cops, you're not leaving the body here for 4.5 hours. We are in the ghetto. You ain't leaving that body there, man. You better figure it out, because Ray and Damon and them coming outside in 2.3 minutes, and they better not see that body there for 4.5 hours. So if we are going to be sincere responders to this type of stuff, we got to go to those environments, and we got to like not be afraid, and we got to have. I have this saying that says, "Have faith in the movement."
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we all need to evacuate the building now.
Damn.
So.
When I signed up for an email thing or a text thing, and I got a text that when you were going to be here before, that suggested you were going to be at the White House. And then I found out that you yourself apparently weren't included in the group that actually got to meet with Obama and company. And then afterwards, the reporting of what actually happened was, you know, it was one of these things where, oh yeah, wow, this is really great, you know, that sort of, and then, wait a minute, how many times has this happened before where, you know, it's just kind of a ruse, and the reality turns out to be quite different from, you know, it's sort of like, wow, we can feel good about these people, but the reality is, no, we should feel the same way we felt before we got this text.
Right.
And so could you talk a little bit about what that whole process was about for you, and why were you not actually included in the meeting?
Well, what happened was the White House called us Saturday morning, Sunday morning. I'm gonna be real, man. I didn't care about going in a damn White House. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't there for the show. Let's talk to the president about racial profiling. Let the people from Ferguson show up to actually get the heat off his back a little bit. But there'll be no real progressive measures towards fixing nothing. The reason I wasn't there, I don't know why I wasn't there. I just know my plane sat on the runway for like 6 hours, and it never took off. By the time it did take off, it got to D.C. like in the evening. When I came home from D.C., my luggage was missing. I just got a call this morning when I got checked in my hotel room here that they found my luggage. So my luggage is still in D.C. apparently. I don't know how that happened. But so the entire experience for me was some BS, because I didn't even want to go for real, right? And then they kept calling and calling and calling and calling. And I'm accountable to not just myself, but like a lot of different people in my organization. So they felt that, you know, I would bring a certain level of authenticity to the meeting if I could be there.
So if you could have gone, what would you have said?
That's a loaded question, man.
That's why I asked it.
I wrote that letter to Obama that we published through the Riverfront Times. Yeah. And a lot of what I would say was stuff in that letter. Like, so I think it's important to note that I can't speak for everybody on the ground in Ferguson, but I can speak for about 4 to 5 different groups that are youth organizations that I'm in coalition with, that we're moving away from the narrative of the two-party system and blindly supporting the Democrats. Because most of our people responsible for this situation at home are Democrats, you know what I'm saying? So we're looking at it like now it's time to really have a real conversation with them about what that party looks like. Obama, I love you, bro, but you do drone brown people in countries that haven't did shit to us. You do kill men, women, and children. You're a wartime president. Nobody really wants to have that conversation. He hasn't fully addressed the concerns of Black America in an outright manner. It's always in a very PC, hiding behind the person type manner. It's never a direct, flat out, this is wrong. With the situation pertaining to the Ferguson riots, or I don't call them riots, the rebellion, when the National Guard was issued, man, we sat around listening to what the president was going to say, and actually having some hope that he would actually see the humanity in the situation. And he came out and said, like, basically he just condemned the protesters and automatically ran with the narrative that everything we were doing was violent. Right. And you said something interesting about violence that I didn't address earlier. When you're black and you're yelling and you're engaging in conflict with the system, that's defined as violence. When a Palestinian dude throws a rock at a fucking tank, it's a tank, but that's defined as violence. Most of the time out there in Ferguson, cats will have water bottles, and dude would throw a water bottle at a cop. We see it all the time, throw a water bottle. It was one day we had like an all-day standoff against the police, and they got all the weapons in the world with them. Some dude eventually throws a water bottle. They use a water bottle to just turn the whole the situation into Gaza. You know, and then then it gets relayed in the media. Oh, the violent protesters. Y'all attacked us first. So, but the narrative of it all is black people are roaches in America. We don't have the right to fight back. A roach don't have the right to fight you back. You kill the roach and squash it and move on. So that's what it is. You don't have the right to, who are you? You know? So a lot of what I would have asked the president would have been stuff centered around that.
Right here.
So I know a lot of conversation.
Use the mic, please.
Is it on? All right. So I know. My bad. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Simon Howard. I'm a Pan-African, and I happen to be at an academic plantation called Tufts. So yeah, I was saying like a lot of the conversation that was being had was talking about the system, but I wanted to ask, like, do y'all label the system so then people kind of demystify what it is? Because I often have conversations with people, and I say the system, but I'm like, this is white supremacy.
I don't have
white
no
supremacist
qualms
power structure.
I have no qualms about calling it white supremacy, but the important thing to note about the system is it's alive and breathing. So it's always morphing into something else. So while you can call it white supremacy, but within the white supremacy, there's other issues that have become its own kind of mutant. So now we're not just up against white supremacy, there's a capitalism piece, there's a piece about just inclusion, and I keep talking about inclusion because poor people, we gotta get over this bullshit lack of inclusion of other poor people. We gotta get over that because that is the sole reason why you have not witnessed a revolution in America is because they have taught poor people to feed into the narrative that you're better than the next poor person. So like
I would push back against that a little bit just to saying like that is like you're saying it's morphing into certain things, but like that's what white supremacy is.
Right.
So it's like they taught the poor white folks to not work.
Oh, don't get it twisted. The greatest problem is white imperialism. But within white imperialism, you have these octopus arms that are spawned off of that.
Well, and I think you're right, though. I mean, see, one of the things you were saying about the older generation of civil rights leaders early on, part of your objection was that they got the analysis wrong. So that when Al Sharpton comes up and says these things, that analytically he's wrong, so he can't possibly come up with the right solution. So you can't, I mean, you can't just submerge the whole thing as, you know, sort of white supremacy, right? There's these other questions, like this electric company thing is really cold because, I mean, this is a capitalist enterprise that feeds on white supremacy to take advantage of a municipality that's structured that way because of white flight, because of white racism, but it's got imperatives that can't be just reduced to inferiorizing black people, right? And you've got to have answers that can deal with that as well as these other questions.
Right. And I think a lot of times if you come in the door swinging the axe at white supremacy, that's the big monster. So you don't get the arm that you could have got. You don't get the sexism arm when you could have chopped that off. And you don't get the other arm for whatever. You don't get the capitalism arm because you're shooting at that. It's like playing Contra. You're shooting dead at the big monster, and you need to shoot them arms off so the motherfucker can't fight no more. You know what I'm saying?
So can we get another? I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance because we lost a lot of time right here in the hat.
My name is Josmar X, whatever, Torres, Acosta, not Torres. We'll talk about it later. I'm from JP. Recording. I got you. I'm from JP, which is a suburb of Boston, if you haven't known. Just kidding, it's a ghetto. This is the ghetto. It's a gentrified, white taken over ghetto, and I will not have it any other way because I think I'm going to take it back. I had my rights stolen, my rights were stolen actually 2 weeks ago. They were taken from me, from my body, ripped off of my chest, and thrown in the garbage because I had a sign on my chest talking about hashtag arrest Darren Wilson. And within 30 seconds of me entering the building of my Madison Park school, the vocational school that we don't have in Boston, the only one, I was sent to an office and I was told to take it off because they couldn't handle the real issues. Is that what y'all want? That's not what I want. I want an America full of little black and brown kids getting pissed off at the cops, and I want them to know why. They can't be going around saying, "Oh, fuck the police, fuck this, fuck that," and they have to know why. 'Cause if they're not knowing why, they're not helping nobody. Right. I was marching the day we wanted to be to, and went and had that 60+ arrest of those white folks that were from Cambridge, white folks from Brookline, whatever, right? I was marching downtown on the freeway. My homeboy got pepper spray, talking about only 2 arrests when there was 10. My homeboy got beat by the cops. My homeboy fought the cops. This is real. Papers, I have read papers since I was in like 9th grade. I'm in 10th now. I don't read those no more. The media was built around me hating myself, me hating my sisters, my brothers, my genderqueer individuals. It was meant to hate us and hate each other. I no longer read papers. I want the news to know that they're not built for me, I'm not built for them, and I'm taking over. Thank you.
Right. So you want somebody else right here? He answered his own question.
All right, so first of all, I mean, a few of us actually went down a couple of times. I went down once, and I've been trying to tell a story since I came back of what I think really is going on down there. And the first is what you represent on the stage. I just want to acknowledge it. And when Kendra first down, the first thing she said is that these brothers have a critical analysis, period. That alone, when I was on the street with Tori, right, the first thing he said, which was odd to me, was, I live in a neighborhood with the worst infant mortality, which means that this is far beyond, regular Negroes. And I'm talking about, that's the language I have with people in the policy spaces that I speak with, right? And in the sense that, unless we all get it, we were told by gang members before the Michael Brown got shot, some of the words I heard down there, which were, I've been on this planet for 40 years or whatever, y'all been eating well, sleeping well, and we have been in a sucky life all this time. And so equally, I think what you're saying is that this could be about police, this could be about systems, but you're also saying something about middle-class black America.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because we were in that arena when one person stood up and turned their back away when a high-powered person of color that runs a big national organization was speaking, and you're like, that guy sold us out.
Yeah.
And kids ran up and said, why are you standing like that with your back? And it looked weird to me in the beginning, and then he told them why, and he's like, can I stand with you? And all of a sudden, this the big day, right? The big day that Tory did his thing. Yeah. And it's like 63 days of people, I will go fight. And you said some things, man. You said, you actually said, y'all can all go home. We don't need y'all here, which I think is almost like we're rejecting this whole infrastructure, this house of cards. We're rejecting it all right now. You said so I'm actually saying it so people here could know, because being down here is something different than intellectualizing on it in Harvard. Right. I pray next time you come that we can bring you to a room full of your peers who had these experiences that talk about, we call it FIOs here, not stop and frisk, where you'll see people from our demo who are like, cops stop me all the time. He waits outside my house 6 o'clock in the morning every day for 6 months. I even went to his house and said, you better stop. It's a whole big deal, right? But the thing I want to bring up now is a part about this that I don't think I hear people talking about as much. When one of our young people went down, they said, and I just shared this with you, they said it's going to take 5 years for this area to recover from this occupation. Right?
It's going to take longer than that.
We got mothers who call us. So we do trauma response for disasters, the bombing, and also individual homicides. So we have a protocol that we're like, yo, whenever there's an occupation like this, if it was in another country, there's a thing we start planning day one to help people recover, to get their minds and hearts back. And we're getting calls from people down there. And there's been stories about people's reactions. I'm just wondering to what degree you have noticed the impact on 9-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and 50-year-olds from this thing. And after the fight, what might we have to do to help those people come back?
Well, first, black people got to start acknowledging that mental health is a real thing. And we also have to acknowledge that we as a people are suffering from post-traumatic syndrome every day of our lives. I call it, I forgot her name, it was a black doctor that, yeah, there you go. Boom. I actually wrote a song off of that after I heard her talk. And that's what it is. I feel like she describes it perfectly. It's post-traumatic slave syndrome. We have not been given the time to grieve what happened to us as a people. And you still see the effects of that in us every day. Our men are overly hyped up when it comes to masculinity. They market the black man as this crazy, sex-driven, muscular beast that can kill you. Darren Wilson thought Mike Brown could just do this and take his life. You know what I'm saying? So that's why when people say, oh, he had a real concern, his life was really in danger. Like, come on, man. Our women are just exploited at a ridiculous, it's just ridiculous the way they exploit the image of black women. You know what I'm saying? It's just hypersexual, I can't even describe it. It's just bullshit. So when Ferguson opens the door for us to have them conversations, you know what I'm saying? Things that have already existed prior to that. Kids aren't even allowed to talk about Mike Brown at school, man. Like, you can get suspended from school for talking about Mike Brown. There's no counseling for these kids that spent the entire summer with a military in their neighborhood. They have to go to school with their white counterparts that didn't experience that for the summer.
Right.
Like, really think about what type of mind trip that's taking these kids on. Me and you were talking about a story that Tori told you where we went to Canfield one day, and this kid comes running out the apartment building. His mom's chasing him. She's beating him. And we're like, hold on, you just can't beat the kid, lady. Like, what's going on? And she said that he took the grandmother's rent money and bought a bunch of Mike Brown T-shirts with the rent money. I mean, you got to be a certain type of person to sell a kid that many T-shirts for no damn reason. You know what I mean? But on top of that, that really gets to another issue, like, which these people are poor. You know, like, that money was money they needed to live, man. Like, it wasn't just money for the sake of having money. It was money for the sake of survival. And that's a whole different type of train of thought. When you don't need the money just for leisure. You need the money literally to survive, literally to exist. You need that money. And we're just, I don't know, we're just opening up the platform, I believe, with some of the work we're doing to make that a real thing. You know, we really like to be hands-on with the kids. There's a 15-year-old kid named Low Key from St. Louis that I met in the midst of the resistance. The grown men, 45 and better, would run. This little 15-year-old dude, hey man, if it is what it is what it is. 15 years old. And when you talk to him, the kid is a genius, man. Like, he has theories of revolution, and he ain't even read half the books I've read, you know? So, like, he lives with me now. It's my little dog. But I think we gotta have a responsibility that's greater than normal responsibilities. Like if I would have met somebody like Low Key and said, man, I see the potential in you, and I didn't embrace him, then I'm failing, you know?
Wow.
My organization, I work with the Health Commission, and also we practice an art form called Capoeira Angola, and that's where we come from.
Thank you. So I just want to thank TEFPO many times over for coming here. We all know how busy your schedule is right now. You've got a lot going on, a lot of great work. I think a lot of challenging ideas that people are going to walk away with thinking about. Is there anything else you want to say about how people might get involved, particularly from Boston?
Yeah, just go to, we got a website, handsupunited.org. You can always follow me on Twitter. That's at TEFPO, at TFPOE. I mean, you know, I think we're in the midst of a real moment, y'all, if I could be very honest, very candid about it. I don't know how this is going to develop. You know, like, I'm young, so people ask me what's next. I mean, I'll be like, well, you should ask yourself that 30 years ago. Like, like I just got here. So I don't know, man. So, you know, a lot of us, we're young, you know, so just give us space to expand our wings and let our minds work the way that we're gonna need them to work in order to figure this out, you know. And we're trying to work with a lot of the older people too, you know, like we're not playing into the notion that there's a drift between the generations, you know. The media overhypes that, I believe. Like, you know, there is a drift because on a certain level, there's a small drift, you know. Like a lot of the older generation, they view the fight differently, you know. But your soldiers are your young people, and your intellectuals and your philosophers and your scholars are your older people. And you need both of those worlds to merge and formulate that fight. And hopefully one day it'll be some young cat coming up and I'll be in a different position and he'll be challenging my ideas and he'll be like, the way I did it was wrong. And we need to rewrite the playbook. So that's what I'm here for. I'm just here to try to push that narrative further into the future and continue. This fight ain't new. We're picking up the ball where everybody else put it down, you know? So we're just trying to run the ball a little bit further for the next generation. So when it's their time to pick it up, they can pick it up and run it further for the next generation. The grand illusion that you have as a revolutionary, as an activist, is that you're gonna fix the problem, because you're not. You know what I'm saying? Like, you will never fix the problem. So all you can do is just do as much of the work as you can and set it up so that when the next people come along and they pick up where you left off, they don't have to work as hard as you had to work to get on board. So,
well, thank you. Hey, well, we've got another appointment, so we gotta go.
I'll give you some bars. I can't be a rapper. I can't be a rapper and they can't do that, man. You got Nas gear over there. I can't be doing that, man. You know what I'm saying? Man.
Let it go.
They'll ruin me. Let me see. All right. Let me see. What if slavery's a dream that a dope fiend had? Krills underneath his teeth and he suddenly relapsed. Saw the ships at the bay of the African shore. Woke up and the nightmare existed no more. What if George Bush is the second coming of Christ? Destruction is the matrimony in sight, because if he is the Messiah, then God is white. What if life is the afterlife and we already dead? The footage of the moment replayed in your head, looping over until you die for the second time. What if money influenced your intelligence and mind? And those with the lesser are really the oppressors? What if brothers are colorblind and whitey is the niggas, and poison in their skin pigment make them act different, and we the ones that made them sell crack for a living? What if?